You're in the hands of an adolescent.
It's mystery. I don't like mysteries. Your bellyache. I gotta kill you right now.
Aye, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core podcast. I am Urza Master. With me, as always, is our good friend Lord Uther. And today, joining us, we have Doc Torrance, Danny Torrance. Welcome to the show again. We are very pleased to have you. Recap of the last couple episodes. We have gone through season 1 of Picard and the first couple episodes of Picard of season 2, obviously ushering in our beloved Q character.
Look at you.
And I have to say, I'm excited to talk the remainder of Season 2, which I still feel, we're 3 episodes into Season 3, we're not going to talk about that tonight, but I still feel that Season 2 so far is the best that they've released yet. So, creme de la creme. Don't get me wrong, I'm very excited for where Season 3 is headed, but the episodes 1 through 10 of Season 2 are unbelievably great. They did something absolutely fabulous with my favorite character of that season, who is not Picard or Q, and I'm very excited to see what bodes for the future. But to get a little background and usher us into Season 2, we're going to kick it off, as always, with Doc Torrance and get a little bit of an insider scoop.
Thank you very much, Ursa Master. Thank you, Lord Uther. And thank you to all at home who are playing along with us. So, we started last week, or ended last week, with a brief discussion of how Star Trek Picard Season 2 kicked us off. And Episode 1, we had a tense confrontation with a rift in the space-time continuum and a mysterious new adversary, which appeared to be a Borg that we had never seen before, the likes of which whose power was, flat out jaw-dropping. An entire armada of Starfleet vessels were in danger of being overtaken and assimilated and in control of the Borg. Admiral Picard, in a selfless move, set the self-destruct sequence in motion. There was a blinding flash. It appeared that our heroes had all perished. And then suddenly we found ourselves in a dark, alternate reality, one that had very faint echoes of Back to the Future Part 2, in which our heroes find themselves in a world turned upside down. The Federation is now the Confederation. They are a bloodthirsty, xenophobic species, humans, who have gone through the galaxy and conquered alien races and exterminated them left, right, and center. It's a totalitarian despot's nightmare that Picard and his ragtag crew from Season 1 have all now found themselves basically trapped here. And who has put them in such harm's way but, as Ursa Master suggested, none other than former Days of Our Lives star Q, John Delancey, who starts off looking exactly as we remember him from his first appearance in The Next Generation Encounter at Farpoint, but then modifies his appearance to come more with the times, to a much more weathered and distinguished looking character. Now, I did a little research while I was watching the bulk of Season 2, and as much as we love Q, and we feel like he's been around, time and again since that very first episode back in 1987, he's only actually made 13 appearances across basically every Star Trek vehicle, more or less. In The Next Generation, from Encounter at Farpoint to All Good Things, he had a total of 8 appearances, cameos, sometimes taking center stage. He showed up for a single episode of DS9. He was in 3 episodes of Voyager, and he even made an appearance on Lower Decks, did a single appearance. So you like to think of Q as someone who's, sort of always omnipotent and omnipresent and all of these things. But in reality, he really only had a handful of appearances. Like he would just, pop in, pop out, never really more than once a season, and sometimes skip entire seasons. He was not mentioned or part of any of the 4 movies, the big screen features that Paramount had done, from Generations to Nemesis. So this was a welcome return for that character and what he represented and so forth. Now, as this fan will say, I personally still believe his best appearance up till, this incarnation was the series finale in season 7, All Good Things. I thought that was a masterful 2 hours of tying up loose ends, emotional threads for the series and the characters, in doing so with this Q's ongoing trial against humanity, which we discover in this season, the trial never finished. It's still going on, and he's putting Picard in what he calls penance. And so where we left off last week, that the crew basically realized that, hey, this reality sucks, and we need to go back in time, do what Admiral Kirk and his team did back in Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. We're going to slingshot around the sun. We're going to go back to 2024 Los Angeles, and we're going to try and fix the timeline where Q allegedly broke it and gave us this horrible alternate reality. And that's kind of where we had left off there. So we're not going to necessarily do this episode by episode. We just want to kind of talk about the broad strokes and some of the things that the writing staff this season did absolutely correct, and a couple of things that, and I want to hasten because I know how much Urza Master just told us how much he enjoyed it. I don't necessarily think that there were flaws or deficiencies, but this is a very different season than the first season of Picard, and there are choices that were made or directions taken, and I think some of that happened behind the scenes again, as well as in front of the camera. And I think my big take note for season 2 of Picard versus season 1, season 1, it had a very clear narrative, like, what are we trying to do? What is the goal? Picard comes out of retirement. He is trying to save what remains of synthetic life and these synthetic humanoids who have been outlawed, banned, exterminated, hunted down, basically to near extinction. And so Picard, with the help of this, new cast of supporting characters around him, goes off back onto deep space in order to prevent the Romulans from fulfilling this genocide, if you will, of these synthetic beings. And it's a pretty straightforward story. There are little subplots and little divergences along the way, but that's pretty much what they were trying to tell. And we get to culminate with an amazing emotional moment between Picard and Commander Data, in which Data's storyline is resolved. He is put out of this limbo state that he's been existing in, but he gets to share emotional truths with Picard. And as we said last week, Star Trek finally nailed a death scene, in my opinion, between those two. Just fantastically acted, and Brett Spiner, you want to see him play that character forever, but this was a great way to let him go out with dignity and empathy and all of that. Here they want to hit a similar note with Q. In this season, Q is dying. Q's power is fading from him. So this is as much a farewell to this character, at least, until they bring him back again. But for now, an understanding that all good things must come to an end. And so the show throughout, as Picard is being tested by him and moving through his own emotional truths, we are building towards this final tete-a-tete between Q and Mon Capitan, in which they're not just addressing what they went through in this season, but why has he been doing this since Farpoint? Like, why me, Q? Why does any of this matter to you, a godlike being who can alter realities with the snap of a thumb? And that scene between John Delancey and Patrick Stewart is another high point emotionally, and I want you two to sound off on that, how your feelings was it. For all of any perceived little nitpicking or things that I'll bring up shortly, if the season just existed to give us that moment, then mission accomplished. And I think following that very intimate one-on-one scene that those two have at the end of this adventure, Q gets to say goodbye basically to the rest of the crew outside in the fields and so forth. And that moment also very well directed, the performances for everybody in that moment, top notch. And so really, from an emotional Star Trek fans point of view, where this season ends with Q and Picard finally coming to an understanding of each other, and then Q accepting, saying farewell. Just, devastatingly strong and emotional. And I would start, Ursa Master, if you would address that. He's one of your favorite characters, and I think they gave him all the props here on this one.
Yeah, I loved how this season played out. I love that the narrative was not abundantly clear what they were trying to do with every arc from the start. I think there was a lot of mystery, as is typical of a Q episode. This was like one very extended Q episode, which really was the movie that I always wanted to see. Maybe not in this exact sense. I know with COVID and casting and challenges around production, we weren't going to get maybe the picture that we could have potentially gotten. I think it works as a vehicle for the overall series too, because it had to set up what I'm hoping will be a certain payoff in season 3. But for all of the greatness of this season set aside, the core duo of Picard and Q, who have always been a perfect foil for each other, which Star Trek is all about, mirrors and foils. It was, expertly, brilliantly written. It could not have been composed more perfectly, more succinctly, and honestly brings in the whole idea of the Traveler, which was always a question of mine. Why is Q never directly involved with the Traveler? Still isn't, by the way, but there is some intermingling of the story there, which I think makes a lot of great sense. And to me, the way that things sort of dance to a point and come to a head in this season, it's just... you think of Star Trek as having this overarching story that they're trying to tell, this hopeful, things will get better. Well, this is the first time I think they really acknowledge that sometimes that better may be worse. There could be a very solid payoff for the human race in space exploration, and it may be the diametric opposite of the Federation, the Confederation. And the actions of one individual, Picard, can literally, diverge, whether we end up with Confederation or the Federation as it stands. And, there are other components I think Q pulls into play here to kind of give Picard the tools, as always, to set the ship right. And the nuance and the layering of story was just, it was chef's kiss from start to finish, because you never really knew, how is this really playing out here? At what point is a force going to step in and we realize they are greater than Q, or they are nearer to Q and can assume that position. I have a sneaking suspicion the Traveler Corps is going to become the catalyst of the future. Just a thought there. But the performance of John Delancey and how he takes that refreshingly toxic stance in the beginning of the season and ameliorates that slowly, where he's playing antagonist, because he always does, but makes that full circle turn when Picard has finally confronted his last weaknesses. And finally Q feels he has done right by his one friend in all of existence. And then they finally actually put that in words and vocalize it. Was just... We talk about fanboy service a lot. I mean, this was the ultimate fanboy service. There's only one component, I think, missing, which I think, now that... Can't spoil Season 3. But as we're getting into Season 3, it's becoming more apparent that has the potential of being the key component I feel that was missing from Season 2. It has the potential of being where Season 3 is headed, and it makes me very excited. But the way they've... I mean, it's just... There's so few things that are written so perfectly in literature, in television, in films. This is a season that, from bookend to bookend, has set everything up exactly the way I think a Star Trek fan should want it to be, and done so in a way that does absolute honor to a character. And really sets up Picard as more than even what he was. It somehow inflates this grand legend of Picard to all new heights. And I thought it was just beautiful. It was just perfect. It was the Great Gatsby of Star Trek seasons. I mean, it was absolutely flawless. And when they remake it with a cast of people and Jay-Z doing the music direction, they'll absolutely trash it to death. However, I do think that, this is really, as a Picard fan coming out of Season 1, I was like, wow, how are they going to top this? Because what they put together in Season 1 was phenomenal. I mean, it really left you feeling very good about the legacy of the next generation. And then somehow Season 2 blew it right out of the water and said, okay, you like that? Watch this. It makes me as excited as I am worried about Season 3. So that's my feelings in a nutshell.
Why are you worried about Season 3? Can we not have that discussion yet?
We haven't had that discussion yet. Let's just say, with this Season 2 being what it was and giving Q that send-off that they did, I don't know how they follow that.
Well, okay.
I have ideas. Don't get me wrong. I have plenty of ideas.
Some of us need to get caught up Season 3, but that's okay. He's not even paying attention.
What are you saying?
What? Oh, nothing.
What are you
Anyway, that's interesting about Q appearances, and here's why. I think for as many Q appearances that there are probably 10 times as many Borg appearances, which I think that's part of the magic of Q. He wasn't around that much, which made his appearances that much more impactful. And I kind of felt, as the Borg has gone along, they've become the massive threat that they were in the very first episode. They didn't seem that scary to me anymore after a while because they had been around so much. First Contact was great, don't get me wrong, but they weren't that ultimate villain in a sense, which then I think they tried to do that with Dominion and make them like the ultimate villain. And yeah, we'll leave that there. But so I do think this season, well, if we're just kind of throwing anything out there right now, I guess I'll kind of, I do think we had a couple of slow moments in there. I guess everything can't be fast paced, but I think there were a couple little bit, I don't know if we call them filler episodes. Like someone said that about The Last of Us this past week. that was a filler episode. I actually think it's a pretty important one. But I think there are a couple points during the season just got a little slow. But again, I just feel like they've used the Borg so much. And I don't know if you guys feel this way. Do you kind of feel like the end of season 2, they're just going to kind of leave the Borg there? Like, do you think that's the purpose of it, is to kind of take them out of the Star Trek equation in a sense?
So there's no minor spoiler, I suppose. There's no reference to that so far in season 3, correct? Like that storyline or such is not being. Okay, so there's still time, but the idea that the new Borg Queen, sort of ominously says, we don't know what's caused this disturbance. We volunteer to stand as guardians to keep it from, and become provisional members of the Federation. We'll talk about that more in a moment. But, I mean, I thought when I watched it, they might be setting up season 3's, Deus Ex Machina. But if they're going in a different direction so far with season 3, then maybe Lord Uther's right. Maybe that's just their way of taking them off the board.
Now Urza's got this look, and now I'm questioning season 3 that much more, because I feel like they kind of put the Borg in a parking space, but facing out to the street. So if they have to take off with it right away, they can, in a sense, right? Because they're just watching this ominous, however you say that word,
spatial
anomaly, which we know is like an anomaly, right? You never know what's going to happen with it. So they could sit there for eons, or they could appear in season 3, which, all right, I'll just tell you right now, I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay.
But
no, I mean,
we'll just leave it at that. That's not too spoilery, because you can see that Urza Master thinks that something might, which is fine. If they were to have ended season 2 and that would have been the end of it, I would have been very bothered by that. And I almost was going to say that season 2 could stand by itself. But now I'm thinking Empire Strikes Back, and that's a movie that can stand by itself, but it's a bridge to another. Now I'm wondering if this is a bridge to somewhere else. Let me address something else. I'm just going to keep talking. Too bad. I love. Look, well, 2 of the 3 of us in this conversation right now are getting a little older, and
I'm getting younger.
Well, I wish here. What's scary is I remember being 34, wishing I was 20 again, and now I'm 50, wishing I was 34 again. But anyway, I like that this person who could never die, in a sense, is spoiler alert for this entire episode, is obviously going to go through their form of dying, right? I wasn't reading that wrong. And to see that, like any human being, even though he's a little fearful. Like, what's on the other side? Like, he's even asking that question in a sense, right? Like, I don't know what's on the other side. I don't know what's going to happen. I just know this is kind of the end. And so I think that's, and I wonder too if you've ever really seen a Star Trek character kind of do that. I mean, Spock comes back, because to me it's like Q's done, right? He's done, unless he becomes a traveler, which I wonder if that is the next step, by the way. That's always been one of my thoughts, which obviously Urza doesn't agree with, because he was just staring at me as I said that, but that's all right. Yeah, but
I have thoughts.
you have thoughts. I just like that they kind of address that, right? Patrick Stewart's older anyway, so I think there's a lot of that going on. So I think we're seeing a lot of that in both, just the idea of getting old and what's going to happen. I think those are all very prominent as well. Our bodies don't move as well as they used to. Even sometimes our thought processes might not always be there or be as sharp as they were. So I think there's a lot of that that's kind of been addressed the past couple, and even addressed in the 3rd season as well. That's addressed again. So that's obviously a theme we're going to see, because they are older. Well, I'll stop there. I'm talking too much. So I'll turn it back to whoever wants to be turned back to.
Well, a quick question before I send us a little further. You raised some excellent points, Lord Uther. to
Of
this.
course I do.
To this,
Like I don't ever raise excellent points? What kind of podcast is this? Jesus.
to the casual viewer, in the cosmic hierarchy of such things, has it established with any ground rules or so forth that the travelers, as represented by supervisors, in this case T'Lyn, is our Romulan, posing as a human supervisor during this season, keeping an eye out on
Yes.
young Rene Picard. And then we are surprised with the return of Wesley Crusher, who may or may not be calling himself Wesley Crusher now. But our travelers, are they on the same wavelength as Q in terms of their powers? Is Q the ultimate godlike expression? Like, is there some kind of ranking where one clearly has more power than the other? I don't know the answer myself. Perhaps it's been explained in the fans that I've missed, but does anyone know?
I'm going to go first because Urza Master definitely already has an answer to that.
Okay.
I think the time travelers are more, I don't know if you want to use the term powerful. Maybe that's the term kind of want to use. I think they're more powerful, and a couple of reasons. One of them is we really don't know that much about them. So I kind of like that, right? Which is kind of why I like Q in that sense. And I just think it's weird that, and maybe I read this wrong, almost like they're not aware of each other. I don't know if that's the right... They definitely have never played off each other, right, Urza Master? I mean...
That's correct.
So that's why I don't know. That's why I don't know if it's a different level. Do they not see each other? What's the deal with that? Like, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
What's the deal with travelers?
That's right.
They're an insurance company and some sort of cosmic entity? I mean, how much can you do in a day? Well, I have a lot of thoughts, so I'm just going to explode here for a real long while, probably. Come with me on this very long journey, I'm sure. I'll start with the Traveler versus Q. I don't think that the next phase of Q is Traveler, because Travelers select random beings who ascend, a la Will Wheaton, Wesley Crusher. I think they are outside of space-time reality, as they can appear basically anywhere, and they seek out other candidates to become travelers. Now, there is, however, a very poignant foil for the travelers who are sort of involved a little more so than the travelers seem to be. And they, of course, are the deities of the Bajorans, the original Bajorans who ascended and live in the wormhole between Alpha Quadrant and Gamma Quadrant. So, that being said, they operate in the same manner in Deep Space Nine. They choose a biological linear form to eventually become one of them, who eventually does. And this brings me back to the Borg. What are they doing? What's the spatial anomaly? Where is this season headed? Why are they now doing what they're doing in Season 3? I think it's all setting up the end of Deep Space Nine to connect with the perfect captain-to-captain foil, which is Sisko to Picard. I would anticipate that based on the fact that the Travelers are getting involved, Q is now officially gone and out of the continuum, still there, but sort of out of the picture, there has to be some sort of beyond power. And I say that only because that's how Star Trek preserves mystery. There are always powers and, let's say, formations in space, wink wink, nudge nudge, say no more, that have some sort of unknown quality to them that baffle and confound and somehow play into everything else that's going on, but are completely disconnected as well. Usher in this spatial anomaly that the Borg have predicted and detected using their advanced technology, borrowing from the tremendously gorgeous Dr. Jurati, who is now the new Borg Queen, R.I.P. Annie Wershing, who made an excellent Borg Queen in Season 2. Yeah, unbelievably well done. And the sexual tension between those two was just, whoa, man. Hoo-wee. Fun to watch. And I have to say that if I will be so freaking validated if they head in the direction that I think they're going to, because the comics have gone in this direction already, albeit a different route. This anomaly could be the purposeful return to linear form of a godlike being, Cisco.
There you go.
And would actually offer up a chance for them to end Picard successfully for the Next Generation crew and offer up a chance for other similar era people who are still young enough to continue acting in a series a chance to become relevant and usher in a new era of Star Trek in a serial episodic televised series. That is my dream. I will admit I am reaching quite a bit, but the stepping stones that they've laid out to introduce these characters in such a big way was such a cosmically important stretch in this season, despite the fact that like a Borg queen is really just a Borg queen. You know, in Voyager we found out very succinctly that it's like, well, it's easy to just blow up all their transwarp conduits and basically reduce them to a shell of themselves. And you can kill a Borg queen. We've seen it happen in First Contact. But all the Borg queens are semi-connected, temporally speaking. That's new. That's different. That's impactful. That now becomes this larger-than-life, greater cosmic power that has a very poignant opportunity to play into something in the future. Now, why, one may ask, would you put this spatial anomaly and the Borg together? Now, there's two reasons they might be doing that. One, it's a red herring. The spatial anomaly is not the return of Cisco, but it would be connected to it in that this spatial anomaly is that giant mechanical creature from Season 1 that was trying to break through and wipe out the universe. Now, what better race to be frontline soldiers than a mostly mechanical unified force, a la the Borg, who has advanced knowledge of what could happen. You then bring the Romulans in as allies, like, we fucking told you so.
Yeah.
It's a galaxy uniting force. Now, what else could tie together a galaxy about to rip itself apart again if we follow the non-spoilery forecast of Season 3? The same thing that did it before. The Cisco. So anyway, I'm playing off in a hypothetical space here, but I really think the beauty of this, like a Star Wars 5, Empire Strikes Back, is that it could stand on its own. You could watch just Season 2, and other than not really knowing the backstory of some of the characters, you wouldn't need it, because the main stories that are told are all very much tied directly to TNG. And the only one that they tell that really is disconnected, which I'm going to tell you right now they could still use, is, of course, Rios, who I know there were a lot of fans out there that didn't like the whole immigration story they were telling. But when we think about laying the foundations of the Federation, it makes sense. You know, working towards unifying humanity, I'm in. I'm with it.
Right.
But him staying behind, that throws a little wrench into things, because now you have somebody who, let's be honest, could have future implications in a big way. Now, where have we seen this before? The Cisco. So, I'm just saying.
Wow, you really think he's going to be in the season, don't you?
Q takes a lot of non-linear paths to alter reality, but he is ultimately a linear entity. And linear entities have a beginning and an end. Q may go in circles sometimes, be able to traverse the timeline that they exist upon, but ultimately there is an end to a Q. We know that now, which means that the only entities that must be non-linear are the Travelers and...
Cisco.
Come on, I already said it. The Bajoran deities,
Bajoran.
the gods. So, they're both non-linear. They both operate outside of space-time and reality, but they're also both very killable, I say. So there is a lot that could happen here. And let's just say Season 3 is explosive. Season 2 sets it up perfectly. Just like Episode 5 set up Return of the Jedi, I would say very perfectly. Even if we want to ticky-tack about Return of the Jedi in some future episode of a Star Wars podcast we all do. So, those are my thoughts. That's my journey. I'm rooting for some more DS9 in Season 3. We have 7. I mean, yeah, she was great from Voyager, but let's get a little Chief Miles O'Brien in here.
Oof. Nicely done. He was just in a great AMC crime show, Gangs of London. You guys should check that one out if you get a chance. Okay, lots to digest there that Lord Uther and Urza Master just threw out on the table. Let's quickly sort of tie the knot on the Borg, though, because I think Lord Uther pointed out a good thing. With the repetition comes familiarity, and the familiarity, even in Season 1. Season 1's backbone, to some degree, was built on the reclamation of Borg victims from the artifact, and so that played a not insignificant role in how that story developed. Now, in this, we have Annie Wershing, God rest her soul, who did, as Urza Master said, a phenomenal job of conveying the alien attributes of the Borg Queen, but different than Alice Krige. Alice Krige was just dripping with sexuality and sexual tension, and I mean that's where that performance in First Contact was based on, and her seduction of Data into joining them and trying to be the robot who became a man. Annie Wershing, she starts off in a very vulnerable, helpless state, so much so that you, the viewer, almost lulled into complacency and almost feel like, here's a victim. Like, look at the horrible way she's been treated and is being treated by the Confederation and so forth. So your initial thoughts are not, this is an alien species as formidable as any Picard and them have faced through their trips through the galaxy. But here's a potential ally who can, team up with us and solve the great mystery. Well, it doesn't take long for the Scorpion to reveal its true nature in this season. And as she begins to gather her strength and so forth, you see the sly manipulation, and you see the cold calculations as she's interacting with Jurati. Jurati is empathy, warmth, love, just willing to go out on a limb, witness how she tries to fast talk their way, when they're down in the Confederation dungeon, and she has to quickly do a scenario that explains why they're even down there. And Alison Pill does like a 4-minute monologue of bluster, and it's terrific. I mean, it's funny, and it's just very well written, and it very much, you're like, that's total bullshit, but I buy it because, she was selling it. As she and the Queen become more intertwined throughout the season, on several levels, it's a great journey. Now here's one of my big picture notes on Season 2 that I again, I'm not saying it's a deficiency or a flaw or something that I found disappointing. I just note that there was a lot of food in the kitchen this season, and what ostensibly the primary storyline should be Q and Picard's last go-round with everything at stake, the entire universe and what the Federation means is on the table. We also try to have this storyline of refashioning the Borg. I mean, ultimately turning them from supervillains into Federation allies. Like, that's a lot as a viewer, as a Star Trek fan, to kind of wrap their heads around. So you have that storyline. You have the exploration. Now, this is tied to the Picard Q undercurrents, obviously, but you have the storyline of Picard re-examining childhood trauma and where that fits into his personality, his choices he's made throughout his life, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a rich terrain to play always, whenever you can peel back the onion and reveal a character through more layers. And here's a character that we've spent 7 seasons and 4 features and now, another 20-odd episodes with. We kind of feel like we've got our finger on the pulse of Jean-Luc Picard, and yet we're still being shown things that maybe were hidden from us or that we'd never actually seen explored directly. But now here they are up front, in terms of what, constitutes what made Jean-Luc Picard and so forth. And he's hiding from his own trauma. And I think those scenes in that episode that focuses on that in particular, I believe it's episode 7, very strong writing. But I was drawing the diagram, basically. And for me, like with season 2, it's the one on the bottom there, looks like an EKG. The show kind of just goes, from episode to episode. And while again, we have a big picture of we're trying to save the future by correcting the past, there's 2 episodes where the primary focus is Rios being detained by Immigrations and Customs, and how do we get him off the bus. I will note that that was shot again like 5 minutes from my house. I recognize the freeway off-ramp and the road, and they even reference the Highway 14, which is the highway we take, so I got a chuckle when they're shooting on location in Los Angeles. And quick on Ursa Master's point, yeah, there may have been some fan thing, what are we doing with this? Star Trek's always been about politics. Go back to Roddenberry, and whether you do it very upfront like this show did, there was no subtlety to this at all. We have the evil ICE agents in the cages, and there was no attempt to kind of hide it behind allegory or symbolism or anything like that. But that's always been baked into the show as a whole, so I don't have a problem with it necessarily. Again, it's not something that Trek has done. They've never not done it in terms of that. And season 1, you could make the argument, you could find a lot of politics burbling under the surface there. So, but I'm saying episodes 3 and 4 kind of focus on that. Then we have Picard sort of going through his childhood memories, and then we have the Borg, trying to wrest control and so forth. And we even have yet another Brett Spiner appearance as Adam Sung, and this was the most disappointing subplot for me for a couple of reasons. Number one, I love Brett Spiner, and I think his best work obviously is when he's playing Data and that model of empathy and stuff. And here, without the makeup and just kind of playing, in this writer's opinion, kind of a one-dimensional villain. I don't empathize with his character in terms of what his stated research goals. I had more in connection with the role he played in season 1, Alton Soong, and this he had this whole colony of synths that he was working for, and he was kind of more of the befuddled mad scientist. But here he was clearly a craven, power mad, wealthy industrialist type. And I thought his interactions with Kore, who was played by Issa Briones, who played Soji and the other, synth children in season 1. I sometimes when those scenes came on, I almost felt like, we literally were taking a time out, because I just didn't connect with it emotionally as I might have in the first season, and I don't like seeing Brett Spiner, like I say, like playing a jerk or very callow. Like I don't think he does that nearly as well as he does playing the innocent, yearning to be better Data. Like that's just a personal opinion for me. Believe it or not, this will shock you. I've never seen him as Lore. I have not seen that episode or two or whatever of Trek. So I'll be interested if he's appearing in the third season. I'll be interested to see how that would differ in terms of, because I'm not saying Brett Spiner can't play a villain. In fact, obviously it's be high on my list. I just thought with this one here, the way this felt. And they only had about 3 or 4 appearances overall. It wasn't a dominating storyline by any means, but I just thought that overall it was somewhat of a distraction and kind of covering ground we may have already covered in the past. And I had to look up like where he was on the family tree. Like, okay, now who is this? This is this guy, and then he had.
Yeah.
There was the revelation he was probably involved with Khan, which. Obviously, that's a fun Easter egg there, and even I got that one. So there were little things like that were kind of, I thought, and then I think the worst episode, if you want to call it that, and again, this is Star Trek, so even when it's bad, it's still pretty good. I was underwhelmed by the FBI arresting Picard and Guinan, and that's around episode 8, I think.
Yeah.
There was a way that the writers could have brought that FBI character. He was played by Jay Carnes, who was a terrific foil for Michael Chiklis back in the early 2000s in the FX show The Shield. He was one of the good guy detectives, while Michael Chiklis was the bad cop running amok throughout Los Angeles. And the audience voice of compassion was played by this actor, Jay Carnes. So he's a fine actor, and he did fine with what they gave him. But we basically got his entire backstory and his whole reason for being in 42 minutes. And from where I was sitting, the only reason we had this episode at all was just to kind of sideline Picard, for that period of time, just long enough to be more of a distraction than any real obstacle. And they could have solved all this, I believe, if I may take a moment as a screenwriter just to do it. The whole idea that this boy was visited and, became fascinated with aliens as a child, ran across some Vulcans, which I don't know if that contradicts the Zefram Cochrane First Contact storyline or not. I don't even want to start unraveling that. Runs into some Vulcans, gets, they try to wipe his memory of it with a mind meld. He ends up still remembering, glimpses of it and so forth. And he becomes like Fox Mulder, he's kind of like, I want to believe. And I think if they had planted that seed, those flashback scenes and that character very early, right when Picard and his crew shows up in 2024 Los Angeles, basically they introduce this character late. They hustle him out in the same episode. And so you really just kind of are left wondering, like, well, what was all that about? Like, what, I think there was a chance to have this character, starting in the early parts of episode 3 and beyond, he could have discovered, hey, something weird happened. This guy just, he showed up, he teleported out of nowhere. What's that going on? And we could have seen, he could have actually been this earthbound, Javert, Inspector Javert, trying to track down these spacemen that he thinks are in Los Angeles that nobody else will believe are there. Come on, we've heard your stories a million times. You almost got abducted by aliens when you were a kid. And then he finally catches up to Picard and Guinan, and aha, I've got you. I've got the proof. I've got your communicator and your tech. And then they could have, bluffed their way out or however it went. Like I say, I don't like, the writers made choices and we'll respect them and go with it. I just felt as the viewer, like that was, for me, I'm like, can we get back to the Europa mission? Can we get back to the Q and the Borg Queen trying to take over the galaxy? So I think this season, the writers, and I think part of that, I alluded to it, was because of what was going on behind the scenes. Terry Matalas, the new showrunner, he left about midway through this second season to focus almost exclusively on season 3. He's going to direct a couple of episodes. I think he's written or co-written at least 4 of the 10. So he has a very big handprint. His fingerprints are all over season 3. And I think season 2, when somebody with that kind of strong vision, as you guys are illustrating with the early results from the third season, I think, the writer's room in general, they're like, oh, well, what if we did this? This would be cool. What if they're arrested by the FBI?
Yeah.
And what if I think, like I say, you kind of sometimes need a strong creative voice in there to kind of make sure they're holding the reins and the horses don't go running off the trail. I think ultimately this show, like I say, without the emotional beats we talked about earlier, season 2 doesn't work, but it got there, as Urza Master said so masterfully, that, like I say, these all sound like minor tribbles rather than actual, like I say. And I think the final point I would make on what Lord Uther was saying on, is it a bridge, is it all that, this actually felt like a movie sequel, right? This felt like when you see a movie with a character like, Star Trek, and you see them in Generations, and then you catch up with them 3 years later in First Contact, and you're like, wow, look, they've got new uniforms and a new ship, and there was so much of a different tone and so much of a different sense, and we had to kind of round all the characters back up early. We talked about this, where they're all doing different things, and they all have to be sort of dragged back into the story and zapped into the past. It kind of felt more like like a movie sequel where there was gaps. There was sort of a gap in the narrative. Watch Game of Thrones or watch other shows, Walking Dead, what have you. Yeah, each season there's new storylines and they bring on new things, but it pretty much feels like the same show, right? Game of Thrones doesn't radically suddenly become this buddy comedy in the later seasons versus the earlier seasons. But this Picard season 2 is it's got a different tone. It has different, there's less profanity than the first season. There are things stylistically and artistically about it that are its own identity. And like I say, that's like Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. They're in the same narrative, but they're completely different feel and theme and setting and identity. And I feel like Picard season 2 versus Picard season 1, that's what we're getting. We're getting this whole new identity. And hopefully next week when we're discussing season 3, it'll feel like it's like, oh yeah, I understand now. Because this is the construction, the architecture. We had to have season 2 to get here. We couldn't just jump from season 1 to season 3.
That's what I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to figure out if season 2 can truly stand by itself. But
right.
We know yeah. So this is something I'm trying to kind of because this is part of my problem with Star Wars. Everything doesn't have to be so interconnected in a sense. And I'm feeling that I'm trying to figure out if that's a bad thing with Picard, with just Star Trek in general. Like, again, there's all these Noonans, or there's all these Noonan, songs or whatever. Does that have to be a constant thing? You see what I mean? Like, do they have to be connected? Why couldn't it? Like, that's just always been the history of the family. They've always invented thing. I don't know. Do you see where I'm going with this? Urza, I know you're bursting. Go ahead.
I have a direct answer to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very important that their family tree is involved in everything, that it's connected to everything, because it is the vehicle from which the rest of Star Trek happens. And here's what I mean by that. We have now seen the Anti-Federation, the Confederation, and we have the Federation as a foil, and we see how easily it sways from one to the other, changing small detail with Picard. And we've seen this before, where time travel happens. Voyager, Season 3, Episodes 8 and 9, Future's End. They go back in time, find out that a 20th century person is benefiting from 29th century technology from a crashed time ship, which is due directly to the actions of the Voyager crew. And they have to sort of right the wrongs. And time travel is pervasive throughout Star Trek, all the way back to the original series. So why is it important that TNG and Picard and Voyager, Deep Space Nine, they're all interconnected by the same thing that connects them to the original series, and that is the Noonien Sung family. Khan Noonien Sung is the first one we ever meet. We find out now in this season through what is I don't want to say it's a shoehorned in subplot, because I think it's very important, and it seems convenient. But there's, as with most things in a Q episode, there's a duality to everything, because everything is connected. This is intentionally layered. I want to say I guarantee it, but I could easily be proven wrong in the next 7 episodes of season 3, so I'm going to hold off. But Khan being the natural progression and the natural result of what happened with the Traveler makes sense. The Traveler is guiding the timeline. Why isn't the Traveler stepping in where Q is mixing up the timeline with Picard? Because it's not material to their timeline. Khan has to happen. Now, what happens with the rest of the Federation, it doesn't matter. The mirror reality is almost the same way the Confederation unfolds, in a slightly different perspective. So, again, what's actually going on with what Q's doing is immaterial, which is why the Travelers, who I think we can agree are likely more, at least influential, if not more powerful, they don't step in to directly impact us. Now, there is, of course, their little marshal sergeant looking over Picard to make sure certain things happen. But the reason why the big guns, Will Wheaton, doesn't step in, Wesley Crusher, who would have been an immediate way to fix things because he knows Picard, why not have them meet? It's because what's going on there, they know it's going to play out the way it needs to because they know the situation with Q. They're aware. It's immaterial. They need to make sure Khan happens. Why do they need to make sure Khan happens? Because they have to make sure Data happens. They have to make sure on down the line. They need to ensure the linear progression, no matter if it ends up in a confederation or a federation, there's a linear progression leading to something big. I feel something big is coming. It's right out of the trailer for season 3. I'm just throwing that out there. Now, laying a little bit more in my journey of breadcrumbs here, Hansel and Gretel, I would say that because we've had so much interplay with DS9 and Voyager, that later on in season 3, as we exit season 2, we've crossed off some big names who could potentially affect this linear progression of a timeline. We're going to see smaller names that could affect the linear progression of this timeline. Gee, did the trailer for season 3 maybe address this? Moriarty? What's he doing? He's basically omnipotent with his basically infinite access through computer technology to wisdom and power. Ooh. Then you've got lore. Lore is still a huge component that could really muck up a storyline. So we know those two for sure. There's rumors of others. With all of those sort of loose ends coming together, we're seeing through these layers, through these interweavings of these seemingly unimportant or potentially unlinked characters, really coming to fruition. Now, I go back, I'm circling back here to our FBI guy, who does, at first glance, seem a bit like a bit of fanboy service to those who love the X-Files, and who kind of wanted to see sort of an X-Files angle. I know I did. I wanted to see something like that, if nothing else for a little comic relief, in what is otherwise a pretty heavy story Picard is going through in Season 2. I mean, literally, I think I got emotional a couple of times, especially as we find out what really happened with his mother, which is devastating. I mean, absolutely devastating story. Outside of all the other action that's going on, he's got to take care of everybody else, and he has to deal with this. That's literally what made Picard Picard. That's the whole point of the season. But I circle back. Why is he here? Is he that Shakespearean comic relief? And if he is just a bit of a puck, why not make him a bit of a puck? Why not have Lore here? Lore is a great puck in Next Generation. Makes for some excellent comic relief, but also a good villain, which would have played well here. Brent Spiner's character Adamson could have done it. He could have rolled into that role a little bit. No, you don't need it. Because you're setting this character up who made first contact before first contact, but wasn't supposed to remember it, but does, who also represents sort of all the, I believe in alien Tom DeLonges of our modern day society out there, in the FBI, in a position of power. Now, this journey is continuing here. Now, you're setting him up. You're setting up Rios, who's going to stay in the past. This is a first for Star Trek. They always bring everyone back, or they get killed. These are two characters that very easily could come into play in the future. And here's why I think they did all of this. Even if it doesn't play out the way that my fangirl, like nipples get hard thinking about, I really want them to use this in the sense of, this is how the Federation starts. It starts with bold people who've seen things or who know things but don't disclose. They stick to that prime directive. Let's think Strange New Worlds. Prime directive immediately becomes important in the first episode. Why is that? It's a breadcrumb. They're setting up the way the Federation will be in the future. And it starts with people who challenge the status quo. It's that political aspect Roddenberry was so fond of. It also starts with skeptics, people who think they know more than they should, or people who are in a position to do something about the knowledge they have that they shouldn't have, like Future's End. That guy was making profit. He was taking the capitalist route. But now that we have somebody who knows why they need to do what they need to do with this knowledge, that could be more impactful in terms of building what takes us to the Federation. It's laying seeds that eventually one day grow. Again, fits perfectly with the Traveler plot in that they have to ensure this whole thing plays out the way it does so that the seeds are planted with humanity to one day start the Federation. The big question is why? Why is that important? Why are they so committed to seeing this thing succeed? The Traveler in Next Generation, just there to observe, allegedly, but takes Will Wheaton. Basically laying that foundation for whatever Will Wheaton's been doing. And I seriously believe.
Sorry.
Wow.
Sorry.
What, eating hot pretzels and hosting a show where he talks about Star Trek? No, I really think...
Couldn't help it. Sorry, go ahead.
I really think in Season 3 we're going to see that come into play. Now, it's probably not going to be the blockbuster event that we think it's going to be. It's going to be very subtle, like it was in Season 2, and it's kind of going to be one of those, here's why we just did that moments. I really think that's going to be the case. It's going to be maybe fourth wall breaking or something to that effect, but it's again, I don't want to spoil anything on Season 3, and I don't want to forecast too much because I could easily be wrong. I've been wrong many, many times, like 7. And I really think that this is how, because they're maintaining the same writers, I really think that this is how they're layering their way to what has to be a really significant payoff. You can't have a final Picard season that does not lay some foundation for potential future Star Trek. It does not bring a proper and deserved end to either death of characters or, riding off into the sunset, Star Trek 6-esque position for characters. You just can't do it without having some nuance, some really strong detail that leaves enough doors open. And we know from interviews with Patrick Stewart, doors are indeed left open. So, that's what I have to say. I think it's very exciting. I really honestly believe Season 2 does not have a weak point, because I like to think of it, as I do with the prequels, 1, 2, and 3 for Star Wars, that they are weaving in a subtle storyline that you probably don't expect. And it may be unintentional, like with Obi-Wan, and now they're picking up that breadcrumb and laying that out and showing you why Obi-Wan is so important. Why pick Obi-Wan? For all we needed to know, he lived on a desert planet and just got old real fast. Well, I mean, save that for the Star Wars podcast, as yet to be titled, Episode 1.
So I have two quick observations and a question then for the both of you. I don't want these to be lost in the wake of a temporal flux. The most amusing, most Star Trek Voyage moment, if you will, in this season was indeed a callback to Star Trek for the Voyage Home. The actor Kirk Thatcher, who appeared as the mohawked punk and was delivered a Vulcan nerve pinch by Spock for playing his music too loud on the bus. He comes back. That is the same actor, Kirk Thatcher. He actually, I think, was a crew member on Star Trek 4. He wasn't even a proper actor, but they just had him sit in. And he recorded the song, I Hate You, the punk song that was playing on the boombox in Star Trek 4. In this, he's playing a revised version, I Still Hate You, that he recorded. And it's just, if you know all the backstory with that, it's a nice moment that makes you smile when you realize like it's the same guy, and if you listen to the words of the song, it's pretty much the same song, and so that's a nice little callback there. And I want to single out, not just for her work in this season, but for season 1, Orla Brady, the Irish actress who plays Laris, Picard's Romulan sort of housekeeper, and T'Lyn, who is the supervisor watching over Rene Picard in this century. She's a great actress, and for a woman of a certain age, she's dynamite. Like, I believe that she would totally fall for the reserved Jean-Luc Picard, and I believe that he's foolish for shutting himself off from said relationships, as Guinan and everyone points out, Q points out to him during this. So, however, that storyline, if there is any resolution there, and if she ever discovers that he's actually the $6 million man underneath that human skin there, I mean, I don't know.
Pipe.
Yes. If Ursa Master's been talking about laying foundations, and that's one to lay some pipe with his vernacular. I think she was terrific and beautiful to look at, whether she had round ears or Romulan ears, and I think she deserves a nod in particular. She was one of my favorite new faces these first couple of seasons. So I hope she's not relegated to a mere cameo, but even if she is in season 3, I like what I'm seeing. I'd like to see more of her in any sense of the word. So, okay. Oh, and then my I guess my question to you guys is, knowing again that this is going to be the send-off more or less for the Next Generation cast. I mean, that's what they're saying. We'll take them at their word. They're getting the goodbye that Paramount didn't give them in Nemesis. Would you be okay if none of them died? That is to say, like, none were sacrificed on this final journey. Do you think that perhaps some of, whether it's Worf or Crusher or Geordi, or would it upset you as a fan if someone gets lost along the way here? We've already said goodbye to Data, albeit 20 years late. Like, are you kind of rooting for each of them to kind of survive? Has that even crossed your minds that some could be left behind, so to speak? Or how are you preparing yourself if that is a possibility, Lord Uther? Would you?
It wouldn't bother me if, that sounds kind of weird. It wouldn't bother me if any of them died. It wouldn't bother me if they all survived.
Right.
And I could, and I'm, this is going to sound weird too. I'm expecting, it just wouldn't surprise me if either happened. So it wouldn't surprise me if either happened, and it wouldn't bother me either way, as long as they go out the right way. However that is, it just, which again, we're kind of speaking about season 2 and how you end Q's character. Just end their characters, the right way is kind of the way I'm looking at it. So I'll pass it over to Urza on that one.
This is tough to answer because we're 3 episodes deep now into season 3, and I don't want to spoil anything. I very much could see them going through season 3 and not having any character deaths. I think that is very possible. I don't know. I don't know that it's likely. I think there are two characters particularly that seem to be on that course. That there's really no wiggle room to kind of get them out of where they're at. I'm really trying hard not to spoil anything.
Yeah.
Next week,
I'm not.
we're spoiler free.
Yeah, we'll be spoiler free next week, but I think the implication is that there are at least two characters that, if everybody else survives, these two probably won't. Well, I would say there's one for sure that won't or shouldn't. And then there's another that it's like, well, if the other one doesn't go, this one must go somehow. Because they're setting themselves up to be in a position of a rock and a hard place. And maybe that's really the underpinning of the whole season, which, like with season 2, there was an underpinning of a rock and a hard place where you have the Federation versus Confederation. Much grander scale. This is a very much more personal scale, but would make sense coming off of season 2, where there's a choice. I'll leave it at that, but that choice, I feel like one character would have to...
Yeah.
Death would be the easiest way to resolve it. Otherwise, it does leave like a door open that, I'm sorry, would be kind of disappointing as a fan to not see some resolution. Now, how they resolve it, I'm okay with either way. And that's something I want to point out. It's not a spoiler. I think either way, the way they've set it up, would be satisfying. I would still be a little bummed, but, I would be like, all right, I get it. I get why they did this, as long as, again, like Uther said, they do it the right way. On a bridge, in a canyon, by themselves.
Oh, my.
Sort of.
Oh, no.
Oh, Lord. So, real quick question before we kind of, warp out of
Got to
here.
do your warp cores, yeah.
So are the time travelers time police, or just making sure time flows overall in a proper lane or current? Because if you watched any of Enterprise that had Archer, I felt like they had actual time police from like the 39th century or something.
The 29th.
29th century going
Yep,
back.
temporal investigations
Which
from the Federation.
which is kind of goofy because why would you...
Jean-Claude
So
Van
that's
Damme
obviously-
is time cop.
that's obviously different from
Macron.
the time traveler piece, right? The time cops and time travelers. So, all right then, Urza. So you tell me, what are the time travelers making sure it just flows and the flow doesn't end, or are they making sure that, again, are they policing it?
I have a thought here. This might be a brief journey. I'll try to be succinct. I usually think about not swallowing my tongue. I love Time Cop. So glad somebody brought up Time Cop. I think we have two different forces at work. I think we've got temporal investigations, and the fact that a Romulan was assigned leads me to believe that the temporal investigations we remember from the 29th century in Voyager and other appearances has dramatically shifted. In that it is not a Federation exclusive entity anymore, which makes sense given the way that the Federation has now changed in the 25th century. So where does that leave the actual travelers? Now, I think the travelers are separate. I don't think they assigned quote-unquote sheriffs to go back and ensure anything.
Okay.
Now, they may have had a hand in temporal investigations making that happen. I'm not ruling that possibility out. I think it happens to be just a disconnected, equal custodian of the flow of time. And I think there's a purpose for that, and whatever that purpose is Picard's purpose, ultimately.
Okay, one more thing. Now, you said this, and I'm wondering if this is where they're going with it. Do you think when this season ends, you're going to get a whole new Star Trek different from what we've known before? Because I really feel like you're pushing that. It's not a reset button. It's not a reset button. It's a new direction button. Do you see what I mean by that?
Mm-hmm.
Like taking the Federation in just a completely... Like, I remember the idea of Klingons being a part of the Federation being like this big deal. Like, that was Star Trek shattering. Do you think they're using season 3 to set up something Star Trek shattering?
Yes.
Interesting.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, in short, I would say that I think whatever tipping point they're bringing back or bringing up or inventing, it's going to usher in really the 25th and 26th century of Star Trek, which opens the door for them not only to potentially revive a TNG-esque series with these characters, but to do what they did before and have a Voyager-esque or a Deep Space Nine-esque series where they could deal with... Because at this point, we've explored, in some sense, all 4 quadrants of the galaxy.
Yeah.
But there's still a lot of non-Federation space. There's still a lot of galaxy. And there's still extragalactic space travel. I mean, they've never gone there. And that's, I think... Because they've explored time, they've explored alternate reality. There is, and I'm not ruling out that they're not going to introduce a character from an alternate reality this season either. I think that's going to come into play. I really do. But I think they are really going to be able to push a new frontier beyond the known galaxy. I really hope what they do. So that's my hope. Again, Fangirl City, I'll admit it. But I think it would be great. And I'd volunteer to be tribute for the writers group there.
I was going to say, I think you wrote season 3.
Right. They're somewhat clearing the decks. Discovery, they just announced this 5th
yes,
season will be the last.
Say that.
And obviously Picard, as we know Picard, will be culminating with this season. So there's going to be real estate to play with, depending. I mean, obviously Paramount thinks this is a cash cow again. And if there's one thing a studio likes to do is milk their cash cows. So Strange New Worlds will sort of take the front pole position right now with room to develop and grow any number of future possibilities. I mean, I've seen Section 31, I think you guys call it. There's been talk of that, doing something along those lines. There was a Starfleet. They still want to flog that Starfleet Academy like show that Roddenberry kept pitching for years and years and years. So that's a possibility. But as Urza Master said, maybe this one really blows the lid off, something in the quote modern Star Trek era that brings the story even more forward than we have. So anywho.
Well, for Strange New Worlds, I think they just signed on for season 3.
Right,
so,
I think
and
so.
Season 2's coming up. They signed on for 3. Yeah, Discovery, that's going to be gone. Picard, I mean, the money would be there to do something new.
Right, exactly.
Possibly. So,
Which could
okay,
also
let's ask
involve
that.
a big
Hold on.
screen.
Do you guys think the next series that comes out will be an Enterprise series in the future? Or do you think they're going to do something different?
Yeah, I do. I think it's going to be the Enterprise F, and it's going to be extragalactic exploration. It's going to be the flagship of the new frontier of the Federation, which is beyond our galaxy, which ushers in so many opportunities. It's unreal. And that's, if Paramount is watching, which I know all the executives love our podcast. They just they put on some Earl Grey, dim down the lights, take off the shirt,
about it on
all right,
Slack
let's
all
do
day.
this. It's yep. They've got it on lock every week. They like, where's my warp core, boys?
Yeah.
They have odd Southern accents as well. No, I really think that would be the frontier to explore because, in some ways, we've seen everything we really need to see. We've seen Alpha, we've seen Beta, we've seen Delta, and we've seen Gamma, at least to a certain extent. I think we might get a little bit more of the Gamma Quadrant potentially, in the future with what we may be seeing. But I really think that the big opportunity is not in the galaxy anymore. I think it's going to be very nice to see Strange New Worlds tell Captain Pike's story. And that's going to keep people coming back because it's established, it's great, and Rebecca Romaine is absolute fire.
Oh, lordy, lordy. Oh,
not to be objectifying, because Anson Mount is also absolutely gorgeous man. But
I wish I had that hair.
Oh, God, me too, right? I mean, look at this shit. Garbage. But I honestly believe Enterprise has always been the flagship of exploration. And you've got success with exploration stories on Strange New Worlds. Now is the time to do it with a new next generation. And I honestly believe that they will also do some sort of a deep space story of a fixed location. Starfleet Academy would make a lot of sense for this, where they're doing the same kind of three-headed approach that they did in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000 with Next Generation, Voyager, Deep Space Nine. I think that's a winning formula. You can have some crosstalk there to a certain extent. There's so much potential there that if they, depending on what route season 3 goes, of course, but if they do things right, they have they're really a crack job team right now that could bust in here and really make a splash with a series that doesn't have to do much. That's the great thing about Star Trek, is you're kind of telling the same stories, but they're all different enough. It's like a soap opera or wrestling. Like, every once in a while they're going to do a wedding. Okay. Every once in a while the Undertaker comes back from the dead. Okay. It's still awesome every time. Once in a while they're going to have some confrontation with the Romulans or the Klingons. There's going to be some rogue bird of prey from 30 years ago that has some secret weapon they haven't been expecting. Yeah, it's going to happen. They're going to do that story. It doesn't matter. I'm still going to fucking watch it, and it's going to be great. They get outside this galaxy, you're going to see more of some of those unknown weapons, some of those unknown ships, some of those, wow, I never would have guessed that this sort of thing could exist. What's this planet all about? Why are the women here all pink? Are they pink where it counts? No, they're purple. Oh, man. They're going to have all of these stories. And there's so much more you can do on television now that you couldn't do on Next Generation or on Deep Space Nine. I mean, when Terry Farrell had that lesbian kiss on Deep Space Nine, that was huge. I mean, for me personally, it was amazing. But that was a really big deal, and they did it with such nonchalance. It was not like built up or anything. It was and you can do LGBT plus stories now on TV anytime. You can do politically charged stories, and you can put them through the nuance of Star Trek and make it impactful and interesting and fun and new without being heavy, without beating people over the head with a sledgehammer, which is a bit where I think Rios' story in Season 2 kind of could have been massaged a little bit better, but I think given the fact that it takes place in modern-day LA, it was almost always going to hit us over the head. I'm not against it. I love how it played out. I think it played out great. And if they use it to tie up some ends of the string later on, I'll be really impressed by the writing acumen. But, I mean, man, I just want that line, remember when we were just explorers. That line should be how they think and guide the future of Star Trek.
Let me just end with this. There was a book that was written by Peter David that had done some crossover between Next Gen and original series, but the very last chapter talks about the Enterprise. I was like the Enterprise V or something like that, and they were slipstreaming like almost sideways through a transwarp black hole wormhole conduit into a different dimension they had never been to before. So it's very interesting that you're bringing that up, because I remember reading that and being like, oh man, I never thought about going to a different dimension through a sideways conduit. It was just the craziest description. And to hear you say that just makes me think like all the cool things they can do with that. It's awesome.
Well, I don't want to say it, but if they borrowed some inspiration from the amazing sci-fi show Sliders, I would be very happy, especially if they brought back John Rhys Davies for more characters other than Leonardo da Vinci. I mean, come on, man. That was a great show. The O'Connell brothers did great. I was really disappointed when they brought in sci-fi standby Ben Browder. I was really surprised they didn't bring in Claudia Black as well, because that duo seemed to come in and ruin every show. Although the later seasons of SG-1 have grown on me over the years. But yeah, I mean, there's just so much potential here. And it's like, just please, for the love of all things Trek, Paramount, do not ignore this amazing opportunity you have. With that, we will go ahead and rate Season 2 of Picard out of 7 warp cores. I'm going to jettison my warp core for the time being and let that float over to Lord Uther for his thoughts.
I'm going to go 6 out of 7 because I'm expecting Season 3 to be 7 out of 7 because it's going to really tie up all the loose ends with one of my favorite crews ever. Again, had a couple slow moments and you know, that's another reason why I'm giving it 6 out of 7. Rad Rob, over to you.
I'm going to go 5 7/8. Like I said, just as a writer, as I'm looking at these things, I just, again, I speak from my own experience. There were a couple of things that I wish I'd been in the room and could have at least bounced off the whiteboard as far as it goes.
Right.
I think when it comes to where does this season emotionally take us and where does it finish up, I think the one-on-one scene between Patrick Stewart and John Delancey in episode 10 is, you can't count the number of warp cores. You have to jettison the warp core because it's overheating. That scene to me right there is an almost perfect 4 minutes of television, given the entire weight of everything that has come before. And I haven't even seen every single moment that has come before. And I still recognize the gravity and impart of those final words. And I think that plays to something Lord Uther said earlier. As we get older, as our bodies and our minds, go further there, and we have fewer days in front of us than we do behind, to take a line from Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Yes.
I think that those moments to me are more satisfying than any phaser battle, any Borg subsumed mercenaries with green laser trackers in the cemetery. It's as I get older, I recognize that those are necessary, and maybe 1 out of every 3 or 4 of those you'll say, oh, that was really well choreographed, or ooh, that looked bone crunching when she bounced off the bulkhead there. But for me now, I mean, I take a real satisfaction and emotion when I see the characters sort of transcending just two-dimensional, the written page, and becoming these full-bodied, full-blooded individuals. And I think that scene with Delancey and Patrick Stewart, and then I think Delancey saying farewell. I think both those scenes together overwhelm any minor qualms I might have had in terms of the script's construction. So 5 7/8. So it sounds like a Hogwarts train you're catching in London. So, and then Ursa Master.
Love it. Yes, I give it 7 out of 7 warp cores. I think this was a perfect season of television. Again, I believe everything to be a construct because I decided to get a degree in English and German language, and I see everything as some unfolding and refolding construct of language that is all interconnected, whether they intend that or not. I can find deep, deep pornography in a William Carlos Williams poem. I can find anything I want in Star Trek. So, I think I loved a lot about this season. I could go on about it forever, but that final sequence between Picard and Q is, I believe it to be absolutely perfect television. I do not think there's been a lot of great television since 1954 or whatever, but I think that you would be hard pressed to find a moment in a TV series quite as impactful as that.
Yeah.
And I am one to hyperbolize about my favorite shows, so I'll take that for what you will, I suppose. But with that, we close out season 2. We tease season 3, and I have to say, the excitement I have for season 3, I cannot seem to temper, because season 2 set it up so incredibly well. And for me, the things I want to see happen in season 3, I probably won't get all of them. But what I've seen so far, and we'll touch on next week, has been inspiring in many ways for the future of the Star Trek franchise. And I look forward to not just Picard season 3, but Strange New World season 2. I think this is, if this were a State of the Union address, I would say the state of Star Trek is strong and has a lot of potential. And the best days may very well be ahead of it. So, with that, we appreciate all of you for subscribing. If you're not a subscriber yet, hit that button below. Follow us on your favorite podcast platforms. And we will see you in the far reaches of the great unknown, the final frontier.